It's wonderful to be here and be part of this panel. And we had a wonderful conversation the other day, and I think you'll find that there's a lot of themes that will interconnect with one another. Yesterday was the 60th anniversary of St. John the 23rd announcing that the Second Vatican Council would happen. 60 years. In church time, that's pretty minuscule. In terms of change, well, if you look around at all the speakers that are going to be here today, very few of them are going to be dressed like this. And 60 years ago, most of them would have been dressed like this. The change has been, if you look at the feast day that happened before of St. Francis de Sales, was that in the document of the Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, the dogmatic constitution on the church, enshrined the teachings of St. Francis de Sales into official Catholic Church teaching, that every one of the baptized was called to holiness. Go 2 days before that, on January 22nd, is the feast of St. Vincent Pallotti, who believed, as I said a little earlier, that everybody's called to be an apostle. And his successor, years and years later, Rector General of the Palatines, Father Moeller, William Moeller, together with St. John Paul II, drafted the decree on the apostolate of the laity of the Second Vatican Council, which said just that all the baptized are called to be apostles. Now, that doesn't push aside the priests and the religious. But 60 years after St. John the 23rd called the council, and some 55 years or 56 years after Pope St. John Paul II helped to pen that decree on the apostolate of the laity and kept calling forth all the baptized to live their life to live toward being saints. But that doesn't mean our tomorrows. That means now. That means together, every one of us is co-responsible for the mission of Christ and His church. That's the teaching of our church. That's why there's so many different people of different walks of life, just like the saints, who are a part of all of these different panels, but who are witnessing the same thing: how to live faith in today's world, right now, so that then we are prepared not just for now, but for our tomorrow and for our eternity, hopefully with God. That's where we want to end up as saints, which means somebody who's in heaven, as we well know. That's all very lofty, but it means that we have to work together at it. It means that leadership becomes wherever we find ourselves. We may have a position or we may not, but as leaders, we have to be the ones who are, as Pope Francis says, missionary disciples. But that leadership needs to be missionary discipleship leadership, or leadership as an apostle, recognizing that we're somebody who's sent, every single one of us, to other people to witness Christ, to witness Him in our daily lives, in deed and in word. Not to wait for somebody else. We could wait for somebody else. We could say that that's somebody who's working in the church or has a leadership position or is a priest or is a religious or is a pastoral person in the church. Or we can recognize the responsibility that we have to lead. Each one of us has that responsibility to take on this mission from God and to live the mission each day, in everything that we do. And it needs to be consistent. And that's probably one of the greater difficulties right now in the church, is that words and deeds at times were not matching up. And the same happens in day-to-day life. Somebody said, oh, you go to church, that's great. But then I see this, this, and this. Now, that doesn't mean we have to be absolutely perfect. No saint, if we look at their lives, was absolutely perfect. We're all sinners. We're all in need of the grace of God, the grace of Christ healing us, particularly in the sacraments, to go out. Not to hide in the church. Not to make it a fortress. Not to make it a place where we are not out, particularly with those who most need us, especially those who are materially and spiritually poor. And not to look down, but to look straight in people's eyes, or to kneel down. That's what missionary discipleship leadership is. That's what being an apostle is. As Jesus taught his apostles on the last evening of his life here on this earth, when he knelt down and washed their feet. We're called to the same. That's the type of leadership each one of us is called to, and the mission that we're called to. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Mark Shriver. I thought that was fantastic. I had jotted down a couple of notes that I wanted to touch on, but you just changed them. Because I just want to reemphasize a couple things you said there, which when you talked about leadership comes wherever we find ourselves, is really powerful. It's in the day-to-day routine that we all go through, that St. Teresa of Lisieux talks about the little things, and that's what I think you're talking about. It's also this concept of not waiting for somebody else, which I thought was a great line. We don't have to wait for nuns or priests or bishops or cardinals or anyone. We have that ability in whatever interaction we're having, like this interaction right here, right? I just will say just very briefly that, for me, the grounding of my work comes from the Old Testament and Isaiah's call, which I have taped up on the wall in my basement, of Isaiah 58, where he calls us to release those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, breaking every yoke, sharing your bread with the hungry, sheltering the oppressed and the homeless. And this is what Jesus talks about in Matthew 25, where he talks about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and sheltering the homeless. That grounding of doing that every day, whether you're at a job where you're in a nonprofit or a for-profit, you can do that every day, whether you're at home taking care of kids or little brothers and sisters or your grandparents or your parents. These are all efforts that can make a difference in sending the message out of what a real a Christian is. And I thought what the Pope said in that video, I thought was terrific. I think he's talking about the Jesuit ideal of being a contemplative in action. He talks about prayer. And I have these little crazy things, Father, as I said, scotch taped up onto my wall, because it reminds me every day how hard this is. It's tough. The sledding is tough out there. And, this is one that the Pope wrote, and I just want to read it to you. It's not healthy to love silence while fleeing the interaction with others, to want peace and quiet while avoiding activity, to keep prayer while disdaining service. Everything can be accepted and integrated in our life in this world. That's what you just said. And become a part of our path to holiness. We are called to be contemplatives even in the midst of action, and to grow in holiness by responsibly and generously carrying out our proper mission. So the hard thing for me is figuring out what that mission is. I keep going back to Isaiah and to Matthew, and I think that's where my feeling is. But the idea of everything can be accepted and integrated in our life in the world and become a part of our path to holiness is really important. But as Pope Francis says, you've got to get out of your comfort zone. You've got to get the mud of the street on your shoes. I think for so many of us, myself included, I get comfortable. I get into my routine. I have my paycheck. I have my kids at home. I have, people tell me I'm doing a good job and so forth and so on. But you want to get out of that routine, out of that comfort zone, and to stretch yourself, as Pope Francis says, to get mud on your shoes, to not sit in your office, to not be comfortable, and to get out into the arena and to be engaged. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I was struck by the readings in today's first reading at Mass and the Gospel. And just to the point that I know there are a couple of young folks here about how tough this is. And I want to just read the Gospel today, which was literally 3 sentences. And when his relatives heard about Jesus, what he was doing, it says this line, when his relatives heard of this, they set out to seize him, for they said, he is out of his mind. So Jesus' relatives thought he was out of his mind. So I don't know about you, Father, but if you really try to do what Jesus talks about doing, in a lot of cases, if you're really hearing it and doing it, people are going to think you're out of your mind. And the bottom line is, you're not. You just got to keep persevering. You got to keep at it. You got to remember that where holiness is where you are. And like Jesus, your relatives may tell you you're out of your mind, but you're not, because you're hopefully in a closer relationship with Christ, with the Messiah, and that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for having me, Father. Thank you very much for sponsoring this, and thank you for those great words. I'll turn it over to you, Elise. You're up.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Are you all alive out there? Can you hear? Yes? Okay, great. I'm Elise Crawford Gallagher. To touch on something that Father and Mark brought up, I wanted to look at, again, the definition of leadership. I think as a woman in the church, a lot of times I found myself asking, is there a place for me in the church? Is there a place for me as a leader in the church? What does it mean to be a woman leader in the church? Especially in the last year, we've faced a lot of difficulty as women in the church, really trying to define what that means. For me, leadership means impact. You can be a stay-at-home mom, you can be a CEO, you can be a student, you can be a teacher, and still be in a position of leadership. We each impact each other's lives every single day. So whether that is offering a friend a word of comfort, or spending time with the poor, or just opening the door for someone, those small acts of impact position you as a leader within your community. And I wanted to emphasize that as women, those small gestures of impact make a huge difference in the church. I work with women every single day. I work with women leaders every single day, women who are making big changes in the world. They're leading businesses, and I think what I've taken away from them and working with these women is that leaders also, they always take a position of learning, that leaders are always in a position of humility, and that they are willing to always learn from others. I work with my team at Ringlet Studio, my marketing company. I work with a handful of employees who are teaching me every single day. Their willingness to work hard and their enthusiasm for our work is truly humbling to see, and I think that's been my biggest takeaway working and leading a team, is that I'm constantly learning from the people that I'm leading. The other point that I wanted to touch on was sometimes the term leadership can be overwhelming, in that I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves of, I need to be this strong leader, this person in the spotlight, and really it takes some time to learn what it means to be a leader for you. Each of our vocations are extremely personal. The Lord has put dreams and desires on your heart for a reason, and we need to listen to those. And those small desires, those inklings on our hearts, they tell us how our leadership is meant to be expressed for us personally. So I just encourage you to listen to those small desires and inklings on your heart, just like Pope Francis touched on in his video earlier. Like Mary, she listened to the angel Gabriel when he asked of her, will you do this for the Lord? Will you accept the Lord's will for you? And she just gave her small yes. And that's what we're each called to do every single day as leaders, is give our small yes to the Lord. Leadership does not have to be standing on platforms or being in the spotlight, like I mentioned, but it is just giving our small yes to the Lord every single day and answering what he is calling us to do. So I'm going to turn over to Gerald. Thank you.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm Gerald Smith, the principal at St. Thomas More, and I'm going to do my best to sum up everything that we've talked about up here in the short amount of time that I have. So at St. Thomas More, we believe in leading, teaching, and inspiring through the Gospels, reflecting love daily. And if I think about everything that preceded before me that was said, I think as a principal and as a leader, one of the things that we do is go to the edges of the circle, and we're in those spaces where things are hard for the people that we're serving, and we're meeting them where they are and really working to uplift them. And Father Frank talked about it being a mission-driven. It's missionary work where we're planting seeds of faith in each person that we come in contact with, and we may never see the fruits that come from that, but we know that through the work that we're doing with them, that they'll grow and that they'll prosper. And so as a leader, starting off as a teacher and then becoming a principal and being thrown into very rough situations, I think that we have the opportunity to, and I've had the opportunity to be a living example of Christ through those that I come in contact with. And as Mark mentioned, it's not easy work. It requires a lot of us. And I think one of the things that we have, though, that we always need to use is prayer, and a lot of it, and being in constant discernment with Christ and understanding that he's planted something within us to guide those around us and really is pushing us in the direction to do his good work. So at St. Thomas More, we lead and we teach and we inspire through Christ's word. And as a leader, you can't go wrong with that. So that's kind of some of the things that I think we really works for anyone. And as Elise mentioned, it doesn't matter how small or large your platform is. We're spreading the gospel. We're put in places for seasons to change lives, and in some way, shape, or form, we do.
Thank y'all so much for sharing a little bit about just what it means to be a leader as a Christian today, what that looks like. I love the everyday leader. What does, like you were saying, it could be the stay-at-home mom, it can be the student, just making an impact. Being a Catholic leader is not reserved for, as you mentioned, priests or religious leaders or people that work in the theology department or on campus ministry office. It's for each and every one of us. And so what does it mean to be a leader? And one question that I wanted to start off with, and Brian, if you had another question, we can start off with a couple of questions, but also we invite you to come up with some of your own questions, and we'll be spending the next almost hour kind of delving in a little bit deeper. So my question was, Mark, you were talking about just everyday persistence and that sometimes it gets hard. And so my question is, when it does get hard, when you're feeling like a failure or, hey, I have not been doing my role as a Catholic or as a person of faith, where do you get renewal, and what are some things that we can do to keep persisting?
I think, thanks for the question. I think Gerald touched on it in a really great manner, which is you got to go get some quiet time and get some quiet time with God. I mean, I find it hard. There's the old expression, which I'm sure you've heard, you've all heard, was when you're, spend a half an hour with God every day, and when you're really busy, spend an hour, which of course is the exact opposite of what you want to do. If you're really busy, you don't have time for God. So it's, for me, I've mentioned a couple times the basement of my house. It's cinder blocks. It's a couple of Costco shelves. It's a lot of, dust bunnies floating around. It's just going down there and sitting there for 15 minutes. I was talking at a school yesterday, actually in Connecticut, and said that, when this was a high school, when you go to college, the most important thing for me when I went to school, I went to Holy Cross up in Massachusetts, was not anything I learned in history or economics or philosophy or any of that stuff. It was going on a retreat and trying to figure out, wow, 3 days of silence when you don't open your mouth, you learn a lot, or at least I did. So I would encourage everyone, and I'm encouraging myself, the prayer. You got to stop, you got to pause, you got to spend some quiet time and listen, which again, to me, is really hard to do, especially when you get in the grind and you think you're so important and you think you got so much to do and the world revolves around whether you're going to get your job done that day. In reality, you can spend 15, 20 minutes, half an hour a day doing that. I don't know, that's what you were talking about, right?
Definitely agree. I have the beauty of being a principal at a Catholic school, so there's a church right next door. So being able to retreat there when chaos is happening is fantastic. A lot of Hail Marys are there, done there. I also think, for me, working with the youth as a leader, I have that unique situation where I can go and look for Christ in someone, and oftentimes it's in a kid, and then have that opportunity to really learn about their story and build those relationships, and knowing that there is a purpose of why I'm here, and even though it is hard work, I'm building future leaders that are going to be guiding others down a pathway to Christ. And when you see that in kids, you know that, yeah, this is hard, but it's worth it at the end, I think.
I think if I could just also jump in, I think if you're in social work, you get burnt out, because I did that work. I think if it's grounded in a faith and a hope, that invigorates you every day, because you think you're going to see God here in this room. You think you're going to see God in some, second, third grader. You're going to see him in a homeless person. You're going to see God in all of those experiences, and I think that invigorates you. I think you also got to ask for help, right? If you're struggling, ask somebody for help. Particularly for guys, there's this kind of image that if you're a male, you're a kind of an American male, does it all on his own, and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and you're, you don't ask for help. That's ridiculous. I think you got to ask for help. You got to, reach out and ask not only men but other women as well, right? This is what we're talking about. We're all in it together, and we need to rely on each other for that support.
Yeah, thank you. I really loved a point that Elise made about, we have individual vocations from God, and I think for a long time we thought about those as, you're either a priest or religious, or you're married, or maybe you're single, and that's kind of it. But we're seeing more of a development there that, no, your vocation might also be that, you are one of those, but if you're married, your vocation is also that you're a business person, or that you're a teacher, or that you're, whatever God's calling you to. And I'm sure Father Frank loved that, because now we're getting into the universal call to holiness, and we're getting into something that was very central to St. Vincent Pallotti. But to that point, I also want to connect that with something that Father said, and Father used this term, missionary disciple. And I think that can sound, to someone who maybe has never heard that term before, or only maybe seen it in passing, it can seem like a very lofty goal, right? Missionary disciple sounds like something that might be very hard to reach. Can you say a little bit more about that? Can all of you share on what it means to be a missionary disciple? And then how do I do that? How did us as individuals who are, students or maybe young professionals, how do we go about living that in our day-to-day life?
In many ways, it's good that we're in Panama, in the capital, because that term emanated out of Latin America, an experience of the Latin American church. Back in 2007, there was a document that the Latin American bishops put together called the Aparecida document, which is the grand shrine. It's actually larger, the building-wise, than the Basilica here. It's the largest Catholic church in the world, the shrine of Our Lady of Aparecida in Brazil. The bishops came together, and 250 times they used the term in their pastoral document that was approved by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, using the term missionary disciple. And the way they defined that was, every one of us is called to be a follower of Christ. We're a disciple. We're a learner. We're following Christ. But at the same time, we're on mission. We're sent by Christ. In some ways, in many ways, it's summed up by the term apostle. It's the same thing. But this is a person who is a follower. They want to be very clear about it, that we are not just simply following. We're sent. We are co-responsible for that mission that Christ gave. The interesting thing about that document was its main drafter was then Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, who later became Pope Francis. And after the Synod on the New Evangelization in 2012 that was called by Pope Benedict, he wrote a document called Evangelii Gaudium, or the Joy of the Gospel, in which he talks about this whole concept of, as Pope Francis, of missionary discipleship. So that's really like the little bit of the history of the term.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just to speak on the point that I mentioned before, that we each have an individual vocation. We're called to universal holiness. As most of you here are young people and students, to speak to you, my vocation was quite a winding road. I studied philosophy in undergrad here at Catholic University, and then went on to study for a master's in theology, and then left that master's and went and got another master's in communications, and then started a business and worked in the nonprofit world a little bit as well. So my point in sharing that story is that as students, a lot of time, and young people, we have put this pressure on ourselves that we need to figure out our vocation right now, this very instance. And sometimes that just takes a while. Your vocation is a journey. It's something that the Lord reveals to you over time. And your vocation changes in different seasons. I've mentored a lot of women and been mentored by women who work for a period of time and then stay at home for a period of time, or change what their work looks like. Life is long, and different seasons our vocation looks different in different seasons. So what I would say to someone who is looking to discover their vocation is that your vocation is a continual encounter with Christ. Be open to what the Lord is calling to you in this season. Don't feel like you need to figure out what you need to do for the rest of your life. Figure out what you need to do in this season of your life, and what the Lord is calling you to do now, and how He's calling you to serve now. And just have patience. The Lord will use you if you ask Him to do so. Ask Him every day how He wants you to serve this day, and be open to His answer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we're going to open it up to questions now. I think Kate and I will go around with our microphone. So if you have a question that you want to ask, just raise your hand and we'll come to you with the microphone. Then maybe just share your name, maybe where you're from, and then go ahead and ask your questions.
Thanks. I'm Christian. I'm from New Jersey. I'm studying secondary education here at Catholic. So I have a question for Gerard. As an educator and role model for your students, what do you do that most, I'll say, resonates with them, that helps them see that, their passion or their the potential that they can do to serve God and just be successful?
Hey, Christian. So I I would like to say I have a lot of energy, and I teach or lead in elementary, so you need a lot of that. Definitely for everything they're going to bring on a day-to-day basis. I think we've mentioned it before, consistency in terms of one, discipline, consistency on expectations for them, and holding them to a particular standard within the school system. But I think first is emulating God's love for them on a day-to-day basis. Our kids tend to do things and they think adults first get angry, but I think if we show them Christ's love and forgiveness and showing them that there's room for improvement in everything that they do is really, really important. So I tend to just exist in the best manner that I can. It requires a lot of prayer from me and guidance from God, and definitely listening. Elise talked about how we have to be open to what God wants us to do, and I think just really listening to that and hearing. Oftentimes I find myself talking, asking, and not really listening to what God wants me to do. And so throughout being a principal, I've learned to listen before acting on anything that I'm doing, and that's constant communication with Christ to do so.
Hello, my name is Helen. I'm a young professional in the DMV area, and my question is in regards to what you were saying earlier about the mentorships and following your vocation in the season. I love that, by the way. That's awesome. But just a question directly towards all of you. How did you find your mentorship or somebody to mentor you? How did you discover that path? Because I just find as a young professional in the DMV area, somebody within the Catholic faith and with a strong foundation in their Catholic faith is a challenge to find, especially, and I'm in the legal field, so it's just kind of it's a challenging road to walk down, even in your faith, and then finding somebody else who is where you would like to be within that, that area. So whether it be legal or not, just how did you discover those mentors in your profession?
Yeah, my husband's in the legal field, so he has also expressed how difficult it is to find mentors in that field. Thank you for your question. So I have also found it difficult to find mentors, especially women in the working sphere. That's one of the reasons that a coworker and I founded Catholic Women in Business, which is our nonprofit that works to connect mentors and mentees. So if you want to check out our website, it's catholicwomeninbusiness.org. It's a great place to start. But what I would recommend, something that I did when I was looking for mentors, is go on LinkedIn. And I found women who were in my closest sphere, who were also working in the same field or were about 5 years ahead of me of where I wanted to be, and I just reached out to them. And that's a lot of how my mentees found me as well, is through a social channel, but also just asking. I've asked women in my parish if there's anyone in my parish that my priest would think would be a good mentor for me. Just taking time to make those connections and develop those relationships is really important. In our fast-paced world, people just want to, reach out and be like, "Oh, will you be my mentor?" But it actually takes a long time to find, because it takes investment. Investment in your time and the mentee or mentor's time. So just taking that time to reach out to your network is really important, and searching around. It's going to take some time. But pray about it. I promise that if you ask the Lord to give you a mentor, He will provide. You just have to be open to finding one. I hope that helps.
Can I ask a question? Is that all right? So I guess, Father, when you talk about a missionary disciple, to me, I have this image of going to, halfway across the world. And I think as I've gotten a little older and actually, did this book on Pope Francis, to me, the missionary disciple is pretty much what he just talked about, that you could do that in your school. You could, as Gerald just said, or as Elise just said, she's being a missionary, if you will, to some of her employees, to some other people. Is that right, or am I in left field?
No, that's absolutely right. In fact, Pope Francis really emphasizes that, is that where we are, right where we are, what we're doing, it's right then and there that we can witness Christ and that we can share the love of God right in that moment. So I thank you for asking that and clarifying, because unfortunately the term missionary, because it's been so for 500 or more, actually 2,000 years, going elsewhere. That's a part of it, that's a piece, but that's not the whole. And so being on mission really needs to be where we find ourselves in that moment, and not wait, also to not wait for an invitation. Once we're baptized, that's it. We're sent. And particularly if we're baptized and confirmed. So therefore, the Holy Spirit is moving us just like at Pentecost. Just like in that upper room. They tried to hide out in the upper room. Like, no, out, go. And where did they go? They went into the streets right around them. They didn't go immediately on these lengthy journeys. Nor did St. Paul. Nor did anyone else. They usually started right where they were. Look at Mother Teresa, for example. She was in a walled school and in another congregation, and she was doing good work as a missionary from her country from Croatia, if I remember correctly, Albania, to India. But she realized there's all these other people outside on the other side of the wall. And so it's that type of mission right where we are that is very key as well, and certainly in everyday life where we find ourselves in family, friends.
So it is, it could be literally in your family.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, families, I found in doing now years and years of work with young adults, many Catholic young adults find that they're evangelizing their families. The age of Catholic culture where, people grow up in a family that's very, very, very Catholic and so forth. Some people have that. That's wonderful. But most these days, it's an intentional choice to be Catholic. Most young adults and young professionals, it's an intentional choice to be Catholic and to live that day to day. And often family members are not. I know that's one of the hardest in my own family, is to go back to them and, who's not going to church and who's and who's that, and then to try and witness without being preachy. That's tough call.
So, I don't know about you two, but when you say the word evangelize, that scares me, because it feels like I'm being preachy, or you're asking me to be preachy. And I think, I don't think that's what you mean, but it's taken me a while to get over that. That I think when Gerald or Elise are talking about, mentoring, or they're talking about being a good role model for a second grader, that's evangelizing, right?
It is.
But you don't even...
Pope Benedict talked about that evangelizing is not proselytizing. There's a difference between evangelizing and proselytizing. Evangelizing, it goes back to St. Paul VI saying, witness Christ, everyday life. It's not just simply saying, okay, here's all the teachings, and and you need to believe, and I need to die, but live what you say you believe in love, and that will transform. And we can talk a good game, but if we're not living in that's one of the difficulties we're having right now as church. People who maybe presented themselves one way and were actually living another. And that witness is a counter-witness.
I love that quote that is supposedly attributed to St. Francis about preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. Yeah, I love that one. I don't know, maybe you all disagree totally with what I'm saying.
just to touch on both of your points. Ringlet is a secular studio, so I work with women in the secular sphere. I don't work within the Catholic or nonprofit sphere at all, and that was intentional because I felt the Lord calling me to be salt and light to the world. None of my clients know that I'm Catholic unless they really dig on social media. I am constantly asking myself daily, how do I evangelize to my clients, even though I'm not bringing up the gospel to them normally? There's always one or two situations maybe that that happen where that comes up, but it's a very unique situation because I'm not bringing up the gospel. I'm not saying, hey, I'm Catholic, but I'm still called, and my employees are still called to evangelize to our clients through how we treat them, how we treat each other, the respect that we show them, by showing them our passion for their business. So yeah, anyway, I just want to bring that up because you don't have to be, talking about Jesus or proselytizing or, working within this Catholic sphere to evangelize and to be a missionary. You can be one just in your everyday life.
I totally agree with that. Where I teach, the majority of my scholars are not Catholic. We attend Mass every Friday, though, and the reverence and respect that they show to the church. And Father Frank talked about us witnessing Christ. A lot of my kids are coming to our school, and this is the first time that they've ever entered a church. And so every action that I do, every action that my fellow educators actually does, it's an opportunity for our kids to witness Christ for the first time. And that's magical. And then I think in my own personal life, how I witnessed Christ for the first time. I was not raised Catholic. My wife was Catholic. She took me to church, and I witnessed Christ there for the first time. Became Catholic, got married all in 1 year. And so I'm almost like the living embodiment of that opportunity to witness Christ and live that.
Hi. Sorry, I'm still putting my thoughts together, so bear with me. I'm Christine. I'm also a young professional, but in the construction industry. And with my experiences at work, I've definitely noticed there are times where I feel very tempted by the secular world because, I'm part of a young adult ministry here in the United States, and I can definitely the call to be a missionary disciple is very loud in my heart. But I think in the workplace, when you're away from your friends or your peers that love God, I can sense the temptation of the secular world, and I can also see that in our members. So I don't know if you guys have experienced that in your journey. So I just wanted to ask a general question, how did you guys deal with that pressure or temptation to give up on your mission to be a missionary disciple?
The words that immediately came to mind when you asked your question were words that I meditate on daily, which are Jesus' words that I am with you always until the end of time. I am challenged every single day in my faith. I work with people of all different faiths, all different backgrounds, and I have to meditate upon those words sometimes hourly, that just to remind myself that Jesus is with me, even in those difficult moments where my faith is challenged or I'm tempted to somehow abandon my faith. Meditating upon those words are really helpful, just a practical tip.
I think it happens all the time, right? And I think that's, it happened with the disciples. Jesus sitting there and he says to Peter, get behind me, Satan, because Peter's starting to think not like God wanted him to think, but how, human wanted to think. So I think we're all dealing with those things, whether, I think people are longing for that relationship with God and how they express it. And, I'm trying to do that, but it's confusing, consumerism, materialism, exploitation, it's all out there. You're told to go out and buy a new car at Christmas time, and put it, buy a Mercedes, it's great. Get a second house, get more money, the whole 9 yards, and that's exactly the opposite. The accumulation of power is the American ideal. I made reference to it as a little bit of a male thing. It's for everyone, but it's the ascend up, and Jesus is going to ascending down. Jesus is hanging out as unemployed, craftsman, broke, no power, doesn't hang out with governors, doesn't hang out with rich people, hangs out with prostitutes and tax collectors who are hated by other Jewish people. I mean, he's hanging out with everybody that we don't really want to hang out with. So, I mean, that challenge is every day. I had this great story that Pope Francis tells about, about homelessness. And do you really look at homeless people? And do you give them money, or do you just walk by? And if you give them money, do you actually drop it in their cup so you don't touch them? Or do you put it in their hands and introduce yourself to them? And, there are various degrees of the secular world, right? And I looked, for a long time, looked at homeless guys that were right outside my office and thought, they're mentally ill, they smell, I don't want to deal with it, I got too much work to do. And, that's a temptation. That's to avoid those people, because they're children of God, just like all of us are. And, I found I'm too busy. So I, read this thing about Francis saying, if the guy goes out and spends it on, cigarettes or booze, maybe that's what he needs at that point in time. Who are you to judge? So I started, talking to this homeless guy on whatever it was, 17th and K Street or wherever we were, 17th and G. And, got a story. Raised in another part of the country. There's a whole thing you can learn. So I think there's always ways that you're going to be challenged by, quote, secularism. And secularism is really sin. It's about avoiding, each other. So I think you got to take that step, get out of your comfort zone. I mean, this is this great quote about getting shoes on, mud on your shoes. I love it. Life grows, he writes in The Joy of the Gospel, by being given away, and it weakens in isolation and comfort. Leave security on the shore and become excited by the mission of communicating life to others. I guess that's what I'm trying to do all the time is, how do you build those relationships and, learn from people that you don't really, in many cases, want to learn from.
I think another thing is spiritual friendship. If you look at a lot of the saints, for example, they choose their friends very carefully. The people that they hang out with, the people that they get to know, and they start to build up each other. Now, that could be a pretty closed club if you're not careful and make it very cliquish and, very separatist. But instead, to take on people who can assist and you can share with that journey and some of the difficulties and some of the challenges of living out one's faith in everyday life and building up each other. But I think the other piece, which Elise is providing through her nonprofit, and which is something we promote through the Catholic Apostolate Center, is spiritual accompaniment or spiritual mentorship as well. Now, those are difficult people to find. And also be careful of the self-appointed mentors who want to kind of, lead you all around. That's not anything that one would advocate. But I think that's one of the difficulties right now, too, is that sometimes we'll follow spiritual celebrities. And then when they crash and burn, we wonder why. Well, the reality is we're all sinners. And that's the other thing I think that we have to also recognize, that we're in a reality, and not sin like to look bad, whatever, but meaning we miss the mark, and we need the grace of Christ, and we have to recognize that every day. Because when we stop recognizing that, and we all think it's on our own, that's when we're going to go our own direction, and it's just we'll crash and burn. I know that's happened to me. Even I'm going to be 25 years a priest in June, and I know over these 25 years, when I've crashed and burned, it's usually when I haven't been really attending to what Mark was talking about, at least, Joe, taking that time also in terms of that prayer piece, which is also the other piece I think that builds us up.
I was going to say the same thing as Father, which is try to find just a couple of good friends who you feel comfortable enough to reach out to at any point of time when you feel like you need to be built up. And if you don't have those people in your life right now, pray that he provides them for you and be open to those, and he will provide them for you. But that's been the most helpful thing in my life, is having those friendships and relationships that I can reach out to when I've just had a difficult encounter, and they can build me up or support me in the ways that I need.
Good afternoon. My name is Bridget, and I'm a young professional in the area. Something that everyone faces is conflict, but in particular, leaders have to face it maybe in the spotlight, or the way they handle it has more of a ripple effect or is more public. So whether from your own lives or careers or another example that you've seen, do you have some positive examples of Christian leaders managing conflict that we could use as role models for ourselves? Thank you.
I mean, I think, I wrote a book on Pope Francis, so I'm just going to go back to him. He had a lot of conflict with the political system in Argentina, and always used this concept that Ignatius talks about going to the frontiers and about listening to people, which I think both Gerald and Elise talked about. I think that comment about listening is really powerful. Really listening, which takes a lot of work. Not, I heard what he said, and that's great, but really listening and praying on it takes a lot of work. And Francis, rarely went after political leadership in Argentina, and they criticized the what out of him. And I think he thought that the Holy Spirit was going to work through that. And in many cases, he had a big fight with President Kirchner, Mrs. Kirchner. Her husband was president too. And, she criticized him routinely and harshly, and he just kept at it with her, and eventually she came over to Rome and apologized. And you see a number of examples of that in his life, where people thought that he was shortchanging them in some interaction, mothers who lost their children in the dirty war and then criticized him for his actions, found out that he was ultimately trying to be supportive of them. And they came around. I think that's really hard, because if somebody criticizes you like some of those people in Argentina did to him, I would definitely have said a few things back. But, he bites his tongue and moves. I don't know, bites his tongue's not the right expression. I guess he's praying on it and trying to move forward, because I think he thinks that, truth will prevail. But you see it, there's a lot of examples in his life where he got really criticized and, prays on it and just perseveres.
I think for me, it comes back to a lot of self-reflection and looking at the experiences that I've had in the past. I've had the opportunity to work under leadership within the Catholic school system where conflict arises from my leaders, and I've seen it done poorly. I think we've talked about when you're leading in these spaces, going to the edges, you're going to deal with so much conflict. And as cliche as it might sound, I kind of guide myself as, what would Jesus do? I mean, he knew that Peter would deny him 3 times and treated him no different than any other person that he encountered. And so it's really understanding that conflict arises. And whenever that conflict arises, before I react, I take a moment. Whether that's to retreat to myself, to my office, to the church, to just reflect before making a decision. I need a minute. It's my goal. I need a minute before I interact with this situation, whether it's a quick prayer in my head, if they're right there in front of me, whether it's me walking away from the situation and coming back to it in a couple of hours. It's definitely being aware of your personal triggers and being cognizant of those things, and remembering to start everything in prayer and with the question of, what would Jesus do in this situation?
That's a great one. The Pope says that every time he has a gut reaction, he doesn't go with it. He actually goes and prays on it, because he takes that moment. That's a good move. Thank you for telling me that.
Hello. I'm Sister Kiara Murray. I'm a novice with the Sisters of Christian Charity. And I'm just wondering, because all of you are in positions of leadership, and sometimes it's, you can think, oh, I wish I were in a position of leadership. I want to assume this role, and I want it to be like that. But it takes steps to get there, and oftentimes it requires faithfulness in little things in order to get to those leadership roles. So I guess I was just wondering, do you have any examples of ways in which you strove to be faithful in little things and that led you to where you are today?
That's really good. I think for me, I never really aspired to be a principal. I wanted to be a doctor, and I really wanted that really, really hard. I worked towards that and never really listened to Christ. It wasn't until I kind of stopped and started just doing being in the season at that moment, and doing the little things and being faithful to those things. And now having this leadership role, when I look back at it, I think ways that I was able to just live in the moment, live in those little moments, is just remaining faithful to Christ and saying, hey, where is it that you want me? What is the work that I need to be doing? And if this is forever, if this is where I'm supposed to be, then that's okay. But if there's more, that's fine too. And then all of a sudden, there was this influx of like more and more and more and more. And sometimes God and I are talking, and I'm asking, hold on, this is a lot right now, but always remembering that He's with me, He's there. It's His plan, it's His story. I'm just a character within it, and it's already written, so I'm going to just enjoy the ride.
I'd say always being in the stance of a learner. So I have a wonderful team that I work together with the center, but also this was true, and true in my religious community. I was provincial in my own religious community, which is the superior over a certain jurisdiction. And it's really learning from every day. Learning from Christ through prayer, but learning every single day from people that we're working together with. And whether one is in a quote-unquote leadership position, meaning having a title, I believe that everybody is leading in terms of their everyday life, but they have to recognize they're also learner or follower as well. So it's like that missionary disciple piece. One's out, going, but also one is always the disciple, always the learner. And I think in having the stance of a learner, that really has opened my eyes to a lot of wonderful things. At first, when I was in leadership, I didn't quite take that stance. It was like, okay, we're going to go this way and make that happen. And it happened, but then often it would fall apart because it wasn't including everyone in that opportunity to move forward and bringing in their thoughts, their ideas, their opportunities, and moving forward with that. Think about how Jesus led. He leaves this mission. It would have been a lot easier if he had just come, after his resurrection with a bunch of, angel army and got everybody to become, to get on the page. He left it with that group that was not exactly faithful. But because of his grace, we continue that mission. So to me, it's really following out what Jesus did, is that, it's all of us together. And that makes for an amazing things to happen in the Lord.
Just to piggyback off of what Father said, remembering, like I mentioned before, that no matter how big your platform or small it is, that you're having an impact on everyone around you every single day. So whether it's just you and your kids at home or you and your sisters, you are having an impact on them, and that impact, through that impact, you're leading in some small way. So just embracing that, embracing the smallness or largeness of your impact every stage of your life, and being okay with that. I think a lot of leaders, too, have a difficult time embracing leadership. Some of us didn't ask for it, but it's what the Lord has called us to. So yeah, just being okay with how big or large or small your impact is, and embracing that, embracing our call to love one another. As simple as that may sound, that is really the crux of leadership, right? Is love. We're called to love.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. I appreciate your time on a Saturday. I think Elise talked earlier about humility. I think it's a really big deal. I just, speaking for myself, the ego is a huge thing, and wherever you are. I wish there were 500 people in here because it would make me feel better about myself. I wish, I was a big shot, bigger than I am. And I think, again, I used the example earlier of Jesus is, going in a completely different direction than the way this culture tells me to go. It was like a 180-degree difference, right? It's about accumulation of power, influence. If you're here at CUA, it's about getting a big paying job to pay off your debts, and your parents are hammering you on that. And I think, Jesus is talking about a totally different way to lead your life. And if you're a novice, you're a big shot. Yeah, you are. Because you're influencing your superiors, your provincial, And if you're a student here, you're a big shot too. And the question is how do you want to lead your life? And if you want to, be a big shot, it's a big shot with Jesus. That doesn't mean you're going to be I think in many cases, a big shot in the eyes of other Americans. So enjoy the ride, because it's hard. And, but it's great. And just want to thank everyone again for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sponsoring this, Father, and your crowd, too. Thanks.
So I actually had a really quick question, because if you registered downstairs in the food court, you saw these pictures of saints that were hanging up on the walls, and those are the patrons of World Youth Day. And Pope Francis, when he put out Gaudete et Exsultate, he mentions a lot of these everyday saints who can act as really good inspiration for us. Just briefly, and we've heard some saints mentioned already. We've heard St. Francis, we've heard St. Ignatius, we've heard St. Vincent Pallotti, but kind of rapid fire, who is the one saint that you each look to day to day when you're struggling with leadership, or when you just need that extra push, or just someone you look to?
I pray to St. Gianna Molla every day. She was a working mom, a doctor, and she owned her own clinic. So yeah, quick answer, St. Gianna Molla.
St. Paul mirrors my life, complete opposite of what you would have thought would become this person that would just preach the gospel and preach the word of God. And my life took a 360 out of the blue. And now I have 100 kids that I'm guiding toward Christ. So St. Paul, definitely.
Well, St. Vincent Pallotti, I have to say, and mostly because it was also my confirmation name, so this goes way back. As an example for me, but also St. Jude, who's patron saint of hopeless cases. There's a whole story that goes along with that I won't get into, but sometimes when I'm in the middle of all kinds of things, that apostle of Christ who kind of got forgotten is really, who shows the face of Christ, is really the one that helps to get me through things in terms of his intercession.
And I guess my saints haven't been canonized. They're my parents. And they're not going to get canonized, which is no big deal. But they've been dead 10 years, and they teach me every day. And they went to Mass every day, and they were pretty good. And they sinned, and they tried, and so I like that.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Can we hear a round of applause for our panel? Thank you so much.